For 18 years, I carried the kind of anger that sits in your ribs like a rusted nail. My parents' estate, everything they built, everything they left, should have been split between my brother Daniel and me. But when I was 19, grieving and too trusting, he convinced me to sign routine paperwork. It wasn't routine. It transferred nearly everything into his name. He told me it was temporary. He told me he'd fix everything once the dust settled. The dust never settled. He just walked away with my future. By the time I understood what happened, he had already sold the land, liquidated the accounts, and built a life on money that wasn't his. Every attempt I made to fight it legally was met with expensive attorneys he hired using the very money he stole. Eventually, I let it go, not because I forgave him, but because surviving mattered more than winning. I rebuilt myself from nothing. I learned to live without expecting fairness. Then, after 18 silent years, Daniel knocked on my door. He looked older, thinner, desperate in a way arrogance couldn't hide. I didn't invite him inside. He didn't wait for an invitation anyway. He shoved his way through like he still owned everything. "Look," he said, pacing my living room, "I need you to sign something. Just a loan. It's nothing, just business issues. A signature for $872,000 in debt." When I really looked at him, I realized life had finally cornered him. "No," I said, almost gently. "I won't tie my future to your mistakes. You owe me," he snapped. "Family helps family." I didn't laugh, but the silence between us did. He left cursing my name, insisting I'd regret it. I didn't. 3 months later, the collapse began. His business failed. Investors sued. The bank froze his accounts. His wife left, taking the kids. The house, built with money that was supposed to be half mine, went into foreclosure. I watched it all from a calm place inside myself. Not joyful, not vindictive. Just still. Then one afternoon he showed up again. This time he didn't barge in. He stood at the door with hollow eyes, and behind him was his family. His ex-wife. His 2 teenage children. All of them, looking worn and cold. "Please," he whispered. "We have nowhere to go." The man who once stole everything from me was now asking me for the one thing he had never given: mercy. His daughter stepped forward, tears streaking her face. "Uncle, please." I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy, not exactly, just clarity. "I will help your kids," I said softly. "They deserve better than this." "And me?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not you." He broke right there on my porch. I didn't slam the door on him. That would have been easy. Instead, I gave his children warm clothes, food, and money for a motel. I wrote down the number of a social worker who could help their mother find long-term housing. I made sure the innocent were protected. But I let Daniel feel the consequences of his own greed. As they walked away, his daughter hugged me, whispering thank you into my chest. Daniel didn't even look back. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. I refused to be his victim ever again. I helped the only people worth helping, and I let him drown in the hole he dug with his own hands. That, I learned, is the most powerful revenge of all, not cruelty, not punishment, but refusing to save the person who once destroyed you. The betrayal began long before I fully understood what was happening, and that is what made it cut so deeply. When our parents passed, I was only 19, raw, grieving, and still believing that family meant safety. My brother Daniel was older by nearly a decade, already settled into adulthood, already someone I trusted without hesitation. So when he approached me with folders of paperwork and a calm, reassuring voice, telling me everything was just part of the inheritance process, I didn't question him. I didn't imagine I needed to. He said things like, "I'll handle the legal side," and "this keeps everything simple for now." And I mistook that for responsibility, not manipulation. I signed where he pointed. I initialed where he tapped his finger. I signed my future away in less than 15 minutes. It wasn't until months later that the truth came out, not because he confessed, but because a bank statement addressed to him arrived at my apartment by mistake. I opened it without thinking, and saw our parents' estate listed entirely under his ownership. Confused and terrified, I contacted the lawyer who had handled the estate, only to learn that the documents I signed had transferred all property, assets, and accounts into Daniel's name permanently. My shock turned into disbelief, disbelief into anger, and anger into a hollow ache I carried for years. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize, he smirked. He told me I was too young to manage money, that he had protected the estate from being wasted, that it was for the best. He sold the land within weeks. He cashed out the investments. He moved into a house bought with money that was supposed to belong to both of us, Every legal door I tried to open slammed shut because he had used our inheritance to hire lawyers I could never afford. He erased my name from everything our parents left behind and walked away without so much as a backward glance. I was left with nothing but the bitter realization that the person I trusted most had exploited my grief to enrich himself. That theft didn't just steal money. It stole time, stability, and the last piece of family I thought I had. And for 18 years, that betrayal sat in my chest like something poisonous. Something I could never fully spit out. Something he believed I would never recover from. But I did, and that, in the end, became the foundation for everything that followed. 18 years passed before Daniel showed up again, and by then, the wound he caused had scarred over, toughened, and become something I rarely touched. I had built a life on my own terms, without his money, without his influence, without any ties to the man who once stole everything from me. So when he appeared at my door, I didn't feel fear or anger. I felt distance, like I was looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. He looked nothing like the confident brother who had robbed me years ago. His hair had thinned, his suit hung awkwardly on him, and his eyes darted around as though he expected someone to jump out and expose him. That alone told me something was wrong. He didn't bother with pleasantries. No apology, no small talk, not even a fake attempt at reconnection. Instead, he walked in like he still had authority over my space and said, "I need your help." His voice trembled beneath the practiced certainty he used to wear like armor. He paced around my living room, tapping his fingers, avoiding eye contact, rambling about temporary setbacks. Only when he handed me the paperwork did the truth reveal itself. He was drowning in debt, 872,000 of it. I flipped through the documents as he talked about business deals gone wrong, financial partners who bailed, and investments that turned to dust. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, not the architect of his own downfall. Then he labeled his demand as a favor, insisting that family should support family. The irony of him saying those words while standing in front of the person he betrayed so profoundly wasn't lost on me. What shocked me wasn't the size of the debt, or even that he came to me, it was how entitled he still was. He spoke as though I owed him something, as though my refusal would make me cruel or unreasonable. He acted like the past 18 years never happened, like my loss was an inconvenience he expected me to set aside for his benefit. When I told him I wouldn't sign anything, his face twisted with the same arrogance he used years ago. But beneath it was fear, raw and wide-eyed. He needed me. For the first time in his life, he needed me, and I didn't need him at all. That moment, quiet, steady, absolute, was the first real shift in our power. And it was just the beginning of what would come next. When I refused to sign the loan, it wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was the first time in my life I made a decision that was completely free of my brother's shadow. I had spent years learning to stand on my own feet, and in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. He expected me to fold the way I had at 19, confused, overwhelmed, desperate to keep the peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and with that rebuilding came clarity. My answer was a quiet, steady no, delivered without hesitation. And the way he reacted told me everything about the man he had always been. At first, Daniel tried charm. He softened his voice, forced a smile, acted like the debt was nothing more than a hiccup. When I didn't budge, he switched to guilt, reminding me that family sticks together, as if he hadn't spent nearly 2 decades proving the opposite. He reminded me of childhood memories, of promises, of roles we used to play. I saw the desperation behind his efforts, but nothing in his words felt honest. It was all manipulation, recycled and brittle. When charm and guilt failed, he moved on to anger. His voice snapped like a whip as he accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and cruel. He claimed that I owed him because he had handled everything after our parents died, never mentioning that the handling included stealing what belonged to me. He tried to rewrite the past in real time, as if shouting loud enough could make it true. But none of it worked. Every accusation rolled off me like water on stone. And then came the moment I'll never forget. He stopped yelling. His shoulders slumped, his breath hitched, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. "Please," he whispered, a single quiet word. It should have softened me. It didn't, because the plea wasn't for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was for a signature that would tie my financial future to his collapse. He wanted a lifeline, not a relationship. My refusal didn't come from revenge. It came from self-preservation. I couldn't let the man who destroyed my past destroy my future too. when he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I thought that would be the end of it. I didn't know then that those 3 calm syllables, "I said no," would become the spark that sent his entire world crashing down in the months to come. When I refused to co-sign the loan, it wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was the first time in my life I made a decision that was completely free of my brother's shadow. I had spent years learning to stand on my own feet, and in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. He expected me to fold the way I had at 19, confused, overwhelmed, desperate to keep the peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and with that rebuilding came clarity. My answer was a quiet, steady no, delivered without hesitation, and the way he reacted told me everything about the man he had always been. At first, Daniel tried charm. He softened his voice, forced a smile, acted like the debt was nothing more than a hiccup. When I didn't budge, he switched to guilt, reminding me that family sticks together, as if he hadn't spent nearly 2 decades proving the opposite. He reminded me of childhood memories, of promises, of roles we used to play. I saw the desperation behind his efforts, but nothing in his words felt honest. It was all manipulation, recycled and brittle. When charm and guilt failed, he moved on to anger. His voice snapped like a whip as he accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and cruel. He claimed that I owed him because he had handled everything after our parents died, never mentioning that the handling included stealing what belonged to me. He tried to rewrite the past in real time, as if shouting loud enough could make it true. But none of it worked. Every accusation rolled off me like water on stone. And then came the moment I'll never forget. He stopped yelling. His shoulders slumped, his breath hitched, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. "Please," he whispered. A single, quiet word. It should have softened me. It didn't, because the plea wasn't for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was for a signature that would tie my financial future to his collapse. He wanted a lifeline, not a relationship. My refusal didn't come from revenge. It came from self-preservation. I couldn't let the man who destroyed my past destroy my future too. When he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I thought that would be the end of it. I didn't know then that those 3 calm syllables, "I said no," would become the spark that sent his entire world crashing down in the months to come. The unraveling of Daniel's life happened faster than even I expected, though a part of me suspected it had been cracking long before he ever showed up at my door. Refusing to co-sign his debt hadn't created his downfall. It simply removed the last illusion of stability he was clinging to. 3 months was all it took for the consequences he'd been outrunning for years to catch up to him with brutal precision. The first sign was the business. It had been his pride, his proof to the world that he was successful, competent, untouchable. But beneath the polished surface was a structure built on reckless borrowing and shallow partnerships. With no co-signer, the bank called in accounts he had been dodging. Investors withdrew, abandoning him the moment they sensed instability. Contracts fell apart one after another. In a matter of weeks, the empire he'd bragged about for years collapsed into dust. Then came the lawsuits, 3 at first, then more. Former partners claimed he'd missold them. Vendors demanded payment. Old associates, once eager to stand beside him, now lined up to sink their teeth into what was left. Without every asset he once stole from me, he might still have survived. But greed doesn't just take from others, it eventually eats its owner too. Everything he built on stolen foundations crumbled. His bank accounts were frozen next. Watching him scramble was like watching a man realize the ground beneath him was actually quicksand. There were photos on social media, none posted by him, of course, but by the people who once admired him, showing his office being emptied, furniture hauled out, employees gathered in the parking lot with stunned expressions. Whispers turned into confirmation the company was finished. His wife left not long after. It wasn't subtle. One day she packed the kids into her SUV and drove to her parents' home across town, filing for separation before sunset. Maybe she'd suspected something for years. Maybe she'd just grown tired of the lies. Either way, she left decisively, and she didn't look back. The family he'd always claimed was his anchor had cut themselves free to save their own stability. The final blow was the foreclosure notice. The house, the one he bought with money that should have been half mine, was seized by the bank. Neighbors watched as movers carried out the last remains of his former life. One of them told me later that Daniel just stood on the lawn silent, staring at the empty doorway like it was a tomb. 3 months, 90 days, and everything he stole, everything he flaunted, Everything he believed made him superior vanished. His downfall wasn't my doing. It was simply the overdue bill of his own choices finally being delivered. When Daniel returned 3 months later, the arrogance that once defined him was gone, erased so thoroughly that I barely recognized the man standing on my porch. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him stood his ex-wife, her face worn and tired, and their 2 children, huddled close together, as if the wind itself might push them over. The contrast between the proud, polished man I remembered and the hollow figure before me was almost unreal. He didn't try to walk in uninvited. He didn't bark demands or pretend authority. He didn't even lift his head at first. Instead, he whispered my name like a confession. When I opened the door fully, he tried to speak, but his voice cracked. His ex-wife stepped forward instead, clearly the stronger one now, explaining that they had nowhere left to go. They'd exhausted every option. Her parents' house was full, friends had stopped answering calls, and the motel they'd been staying in was demanding payment they no longer had. The children stared at me with wide, uncertain eyes, clutching backpacks that were clearly filled with everything they still owned. Daniel finally looked up, and the sight of him nearly stole my breath, not out of pity, but out of shock. His face was sunken, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He wasn't the calculating man who stole from me. He wasn't the smug brother who once smirked at my loss. He wasn't even the furious man who demanded I rescue him. He was something far smaller, a man stripped of every layer he had used to hide his flaws. "Please," he said, his voice barely more than a rasp. "I need your help. We need your help." His children stepped closer, instinctively gravitating toward any adult who might offer stability. His daughter held her brother's hand, so tightly her knuckles whitened. There was no manipulation in their eyes, no entitlement, only fear and confusion. They didn't understand the long history between their father and me. They only knew that they were losing everything. What struck me most was the shift in him. For the first time in our lives, he wasn't pretending. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to control the narrative or twist guilt into a weapon. He was simply begging, not for luxury, not for status, not even for himself, really, but for a sliver of hope for the family he had failed. That moment stretched between us, heavy and quiet. And I knew then that what happened next would define not only my future, but his as well. I looked at Daniel, at the man he had become, and for the first time in 18 years, I felt something unexpected, not forgiveness, not sympathy, but clarity. The children standing behind him had done nothing to deserve their fear or the instability swallowing their world. They weren't responsible for the choices their father made, the lies he told, or the bridges he burned. They were innocent, and their trembling shoulders told me they had endured far more than they should have. But Daniel himself, he was facing the consequences he had spent years avoiding, and it wasn't my job, nor my responsibility, to save him from them. I stepped outside and knelt to the children's level. Their eyes met mine with a mix of uncertainty and hope. I told them gently that I would help them, that they would not be left hungry or homeless, that their safety mattered to me. I asked what they needed most: warm clothes, food, a place to sleep, and the relief that washed over their faces was enough to confirm I was making the right choice. Their mother watched quietly, a tired gratitude in her eyes. She wasn't asking me to fix her ex-husband. She was asking for stability for her kids, and that was something I could give. When I stood back up, Daniel's gaze clung to me like a drowning man begging for a lifeline. He stepped forward, voice trembling, trying to say he'd change, that he'd learned, that he didn't deserve to be abandoned. But I had heard variations of those promises before, when we were young, when he stole the inheritance, when he pretended he'd protect me, when he lied and justified and manipulated. Nothing in his past suggested that helping him would lead anywhere but back into the same cycle of betrayal. So I told him the truth plainly. I would help the children. I would help their mother. I would give them what they needed to get back on their feet. But I would not help him. Not with money. Not with shelter. Not with a signature. Not with anything that would tie my life to his again. His face crumpled, the last remnants of pride dissolving in the cold evening air. He tried to argue, then begged, then whispered apologies I suspect were more desperation than sincerity. But I stood firm. He needed to face the consequences of the life he had built on lies and stolen things. And I needed to protect the life I had built on honesty and hard-earned resilience. Helping the innocent while refusing to save the guilty wasn't cruelty. It was justice, the quiet kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rage, doesn't destroy, but simply refuses to carry a weight that was never yours to bear. In the end, my greatest revenge wasn't punishing him. It was walking away without anger, without fear, and without the slightest need for him ever again.